The third type of virtual disk that you can create is very interesting. It's a differencing disk. And you can see this option right through here. We're actually going to create it a slightly different way here in a second, but I want to show you this. Now, the concept to a differencing disk is kind of challenging at first, and it points out there's a parent-child relationship. Well, here's how this works. I've already built a virtual machine. I installed the operating system on a virtual disk, and I install my applications on it. But let's say that I don't want that ever changed. I don't want write operations to occur to that first virtual disk. Instead, I want write options to occur to a separate disk. That's what a differencing disk is used for. And it's a parent-child relationship. That first disk that has your operating system and your applications, that's the parent. And then the child disk is where we're going to do all the writes. Now, this gives you a lot of flexibility and a lot of different options when you start to sit down and think this through. Think about it. You can have a lab environment or a development environment where you have the operating system and the applications, and then you set up a differencing disk where all of the writes are done. And when you want to roll back to that original environment, you just delete the differencing disk and add a new one. This can also be used in production, though, in a variety of ways. So you have the parent disk, and you've decided that there's a lot of write operations that are going to occur. You want them on a different set of physical platters to separate the OS from the data so you get better performance. Again, a perfect option for a differencing disk that you put in a different storage location. One of my favorite options with differencing disks is both the development environment where I can quickly roll stuff back, but also if you think about it in a virtual desktop infrastructure, I could have a parent disk set up with the applications that I want for everybody. And then I can create separate differencing disks for different users that'll store the user's individual configuration information and their individual data. So there are several options for this, both performance-wise and how you want to use it in production. And creating differencing disks isn't the challenge. It's keeping it straight that what the differencing disk is used for, because by itself, this is a non-bootable disk with just data on it. So you always need to hook it to the parent, and that's what you'll see. Now, you can create this right through here. In fact, I'm going to show you, if I say differencing disk, and I'm going to leave the name alone right now, it comes up with a unique question here that to specify what disk is the parent, because you have to attach it to a parent. Well, let me show you another way. I had mentioned this earlier. Let's go out to settings and let's add a differencing disk through here instead, because I wanted you to see something. Now, I've chosen the server 1 virtual machine, and this is the parent that I'm going to use, server 1 as the virtual drive, because I've installed my operating system, I have my applications on it. Now, since this is going to be the parent, we're not going to have this in the definition of this VM. So I need to remove this. I'm going to go down here and click remove. I'll say apply. And I'm also going to remove that fixed disk that I added earlier while I'm here. And now at this iSCSI controller, let's go ahead and add a differencing disk. And we're going to click new. And it's the same wizard that comes up. And I'll select differencing. And let's choose a name for this called diff1. Now, like I had pointed out earlier, we now need to tell it what the parent is, and this is what links the disks together. So I'm going to go out to browse, and I'm going to say the parent is going to be server 1. Next, and then I'll finish. Now, I'm going to click apply here, but take a look here at the screen. You can see that the differencing drive is now the hard drive that's listed. So all changes are going to be done to this. So when we start this virtual machine, it'll use server 1 as the parent, read from that, and then do all the writes to the differencing disk. In fact, let's go ahead and start this. And I'm going to show you that I'm going to make some changes after it gets started. Let's click start. And when he comes up, I'll sign in, and then we'll go into Notepad and we'll create some files, that kind of thing. We'll just create some files, and then I'll show you that there are some changes made. Log in. And again, I'm not going to maximize this virtual machines window because I want you to kind of keep in mind that it is always a virtual machine. So let's just make some files real quick. And I'm going to do this with PowerShell. Let me scroll up here. Let's get a service list and send it out to a file. Let's just put it on the root of C called services.txt. and we'll get some processes and export that as XML to C:, and we'll call it process. So I'm just making a couple of simple changes to this volume. Now, when I'm done, in this case, so that you can see the differences, let's go out to Explorer. And you know what? Let's stop the computer just so we can be clear about this. So we'll go out, and I'm going to go back out to the C drive, to users, and public documents, Hyper-V, virtual hard disks. And here is the differencing disk. And if you look at the timestamp on it versus server 1, let's see, all of the writes are now going to that differencing disk. And the best part about this is that if I'm making some changes and I don't like what happened, this is a great way to test like new updates and security updates. If I don't like what happened, I can now get rid of this differencing disk, make a brand new one, or roll back right to the parent all the way. Now, the other interesting thing about this is now that I've got a parent disk that is set up just the way I want it, I can now make new virtual machines, and let's call this a just new server. And we'll make it Gen 2. Give it some memory. I'm not worried about the network right now. And see here, it says that I can create a new virtual disk for this, but I'm going to say attach a disk later. I'll say finish. And on this new server, I'm going to go into settings, and I'm going to make a differencing disk, and I'm going to attach it to that same parent. So now I'm kind of using that parent as the base resource for multiple machines. So the operating system and the applications I put on there, they'll all get, and they can make their own individual changes to the data. So differencing disks, as I go through here, we'll just leave this, call it new virtual disk. And I'm going to select the parent, server 1, finish. And now I've got a new differencing disk out there. Say apply, and I can start this machine. And again, start it. And all changes, once again, will be made to the differencing disk. But when he comes up, I'll be able to sign into him, and I'll have my operating system and the applications that I set up for him. Let's sign in. Oh, there it is. Now, we're not going to have those files that I created on the other server because they don't exist on this differencing disk. It has its own separate data. In fact, I'll go out to the C drive here, and I had created those files, but you don't see any of those files listed. Differencing disks can be used in a variety of ways. Performance in production, putting it on separate storage, and using differencing disks in a test or lab or development environment where you can quickly roll back if you're making changes and you don't like the results. Also, as we mentioned at the very beginning of this, a VDI infrastructure where you have multiple machines pulling from the same parent. These children now allowing users to have their own custom data. Differencing disks can be very helpful, and it's worth spending time with, not only for the 7410 exam looking at the differencing disk, but all the ways you can use this in your own environment. Now, what's coming up next, we've made some of these disks. We'd like to be able to edit them, maybe compact them, change their size, convert them from VHD to VHDX. So coming up next, we're going to modify the VHDs.